So, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, the future researchers of STEM fields. I'm joining here from California today from one of my friends' place. I happened to visit my hometown last week, and on my way, I got my car broke down. So, I happened to get into my friend's place last night. And here from California, I'm joining you. I think all of you are fine and wish we can go ahead. Let me keep the video off and go ahead with what we have got. So, very good morning. Can I hear from one of you that you all are also greeting me with a good morning wish?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you. Right. So, now we've been discussing a lot about simple logics of scientific communication, particularly for research communication, how language and structures, simply the linguistic engineering aspect of your research when it articulates in a form of a research paper and so on. And we happen to touch on a couple of aspects like how these word, phrases, sentences, and structural engineering could be applied in scientific communication. That's one aspect. And secondly, we were looking at aspects such as generative AI, how we can make use of the new technologies in a meaningful, ethical, and in a constructive way to make our research rich and sound and actually uh, nurturing each other. So, with that very beginning, we are today moving into the actual research write-up. We'll be starting from the whole structure of the academic paper, starting from introduction. What comes before introduction is abstract, but actually abstract is what we call the front matter of a research paper, of a research writing, even a thesis or whatever. Abstract brings as the summary, or rather the academic executive summary of the whole scientific work you done, and we do not consider it as a part of the research write-up, but we consider it as the front matter, which means something that comes on top of what we write as a research paper. We'll be looking at that aspect on abstract, perhaps as the last or the penultimate subject matter of our discussion. Today, we are going to start with the introduction. Introduction is typically where you begin the whole story that you're going to narrate in your academic paper. Today, we'll be mastering the introduction. I'm sure that all of you have at least written the first chapter of your dissertation, or else you have written at least one single academic journal paper in your lifetime, so that you know what I'm referring as the introduction. Right. So, chapter 13 of the Wallworks book that I'm taking as the cornerstone manuscript basis for our discussion today. We'll be looking at strategies, structures, together with some case studies as to how we can try with our introduction. So don't lose your attention, because we are going to begin the whole scientific writing structure starting from introduction. Well, so to begin with, when you start reading a journal article, you typically start with the abstract. Upon reading the abstract and title, you realize that something is going to be relevant in this particular article for your field of work. So when and where you move from abstract to the introduction, as a reader, now we have nearly 35 plus readers here who are academic readers, and of course who are from STEM fields. So, my dear friends, as academic readers, when you start reading the introduction of a simple or complex or interesting or not so interesting research paper, what actually do you expect in the introduction? Can I hear what you expect in your introduction? I would love to hear from you, but if you feel like you cannot speak with your microphone or rather you don't feel like speaking, you can type it and send in your chat. So, my question is quite simple. Imagine yourself as a reader, and when you peep into the first research article, you read your abstract, yes. Having read the abstract, you realize that this particular article is going to be partly relevant to you, right? Maybe for your study, maybe for your research, maybe for the field that you're studying. Having realized that it's going to be a really relevant stuff, you start reading the introduction. Before you read the introduction, what do you expect in a general introduction of a research paper? That's my question. What do you expect when you, as a reader, expect in an introduction? I'm waiting for your answers, my dear friends. If somebody can speak, that's perfect. Well, friends, I wish that I'm audible at your end. Well, Pamodar started the dialogue. Overview of the research area. Okay, okay. So you expect an overview of the research area. Okay. What else, friends? What else? Hamuda expects an overview of the area of research in the introduction. Now, I told you to be in the shoes of a reader, right? Not the research writer. Be in the shoes of a research reader, an article reader. What do you expect in an introduction? And Nisal, thank you. And you say it's overall idea about the problem, domain, and any research gap. Okay, okay. Mhm. What our previous work? So that is partly what Binur expects. Okay, and Kusal expects purpose and findings. Okay, in the introduction. Okay, okay. And Rangan says ground details, background, problem statement, research aims, some advantages. Okay, basic research methods, perfect. And Aslam says, what are the main core in the paper? What is the research gap and how the research plan to overcome the problem? Great. And Sachini says, briefly explain the topic and why it is important. Okay. Now you would see this is something that we have to often do. What? When you read, you have to assume yourself as a writer. Okay? Because you're going to write your paper. And when you're writing, what reader expects is part of the imagination that you should have in your writing journey. And on the other hand, when you're reading, you have to assume the role of a writer as well. Now, here we are going to read an introduction, and you say these are the things that you expect. So, you see, if you take some of these common key terminologies that you all happen to share with me, they include uh, mostly the relevant data, background, research gap, contributions, aims, objectives, and so on. Yes, perfect. So, with that little beginning, let us move on to what we are going to achieve today. So we'll be looking at the purposes of an introduction. What are the 3 points that I have highlighted there? In an introduction, typically, in any scientific or non-scientific, there aren't any non-scientific, but non-pure scientific, like humanities and other non-pure science papers also follow this structure. That's it. Introduction is typically bringing you a bit of a background in the sense you position some knowledge, and your positioning is actually is if you look at the coordinates where you locate your own research, you have to create a bit of a background. Okay. Those to provide knowledge so readers appreciate how your findings advance current science. That is one aspect that we expect in an introduction. And number two is roadmap. What do you mean by roadmap? Now, in your research write-up, what you're going to do is you're going to create a contact with your reader. And when you contact with your reader, you have to persuade that you motivate your reader to read you. Now, keep in mind that your reader is typically a person who reads a lot and he has a lot to read, but still your write-up is going to be part of his interest. So you are establishing a bit of a negotiation with your reader. And in this very negotiation, keep in mind that you're dealing with not an average reader. You're dealing with someone who is interested in your field, particularly someone with a bit of a knowledge on your domain or discipline or research area. So a person of that caliber do not simply read a paper without knowing what comes in it. So that at the very onset of an introduction, it's a matter that you have to follow as a rule of thumb, that you should provide the reader with a roadmap of from where to where you are escorting your reader, right? So you are going to be taking the hands of the reader and escort the reader from one place to another, and you have to reveal in your introduction what is your roadmap, what are the milestones that you're passing through in this. So readers should be informed how you plan to develop the topic and your line of argument. So it's a right, and of course it's an ethic, because as I often call this scientific communication, science communication, or whatever we call it, as it should be a place where crystal clear communication happens. And to refer to you to my own reference to it, we are simply making a telepathic communication with your reader. Now, in order to create this telepathic communication, it's a must for you to start with a roadmap so that your reader and you start with a sort of a negotiating, negotiating agenda. So what is the agenda? Agenda is simply the roadmap. With the roadmap, you indicate your reader, yes, from here to there, I'll be escorting with you in this research paper. So that is second aspect of the introduction, or rather one of the purposes of introduction. And third thing is actually you have to provide your reader with the necessary basic toolkit. What do you mean by toolkit? Now, your reader is reading something that you have tried maybe over years, over months, or so on. You are much, much, much more familiar with the terminology, the definitions, the boundaries, the hypotheses, and everything, to be frank. So, though you are familiar with all those aspects in your own mind, your reader is not, because it's the first time that he's going to read your paper. And in the introduction, it's necessary for you to provide the reader with necessary toolkit, backpack, toolkit to navigate through your paper, because without providing those toolkits to tell you the terminology, definitions, and motivation. The motivation is basically your research objective. Your research objective, when you reveal it, it becomes simply a reason for your reader to be part of your articles reading. So, what we have discussed here is quite simple, but keep in mind that they are really interesting and, of course, really significant, because when you are starting to write up with an introduction, keep in mind that it is a must for you to provide a bit of a background and then provide the roadmap, and, of course, providing the necessary tools, particularly the definitions, jargon, terminology, and perhaps if you have any hypotheses, you have to reveal them in your introduction. Well, I'm moving to the next slide, but I'm asking you to answer a question. On chat, you can respond it. What's it? We have just discussed three essential things that we expect in an introduction, the purposes of introduction. Quickly type it out and send me for me to confirm that you were with me in the discussion. Type and send me in chat. What are the three purposes that we've been discussing so far? Thank you, Rashila, for beginning the discussion. Background, research gap, and contribution of the paper to the particular research domain. Rashila, you seem to have answered an earlier question, right? Not the just question, the question that I just raised, right? I was talking about three particular aspects, functions, or other purposes of introduction. Just a slide ago. Yeah. I'm asking what are those three functions of the introduction. Yeah, Rangana? And Aslam began. Background, roadmap, toolkit. Yes, exactly. Roadmap, tools, and background. Well, I'm happy at least Aslam was listening to me together with Rangana. Yes. Well, let's move on. No worries. Key skills for STEM researchers. Now, you guys are going to be the leading Sri Lankan researchers who will be determining the STEM proportion of Sri Lanka in future world of or industry of STEM related areas. Now, in this, what skills do you expect? Now, today, we are going to show you in an introduction discourse, or rather discourse about introduction of a research paper, we'll be looking at certain skills that STEM researchers should have in order to be a master of a top class introduction of a research paper. So what they are? Now, your introduction actually gives your reader a chance for you to show your ability to say something that have been said before. Now, remember, you are dealing with something, not something very new, but you are dealing with something which is already there, which is existing, which is actually being discussed, which is being researched here and there. So you have to say something which is the self-same thing that others have been speaking of. So quite simply, you have to show in your introduction your unique ability to say the same thing that have been said before by others. But what you have to maintain is you should be able to tell the same thing which is being said once and again so far in a different, intriguing way. Why different and why intriguing? The difference is because you have to ensure that your signature is there. Yes, it's about this field, but on this very field, I'm dealing with this particular different aspect. Intriguing way because since you are placing your research in the mid of other researchers of the same field, You have to ensure that your research, your write-up, your narrative, your research writing should be, in a way, appealing to your reader. So this reframing is a key skill that you have to possess. Because it's a framing is already there, but you are going to reframe it with a way uniquely you place your signature in a different, intriguing way, but you are talking about the self-same thing that others have discussed so far. So that is one of the skills, reframing skill. The second skill is actually when you write a research for a wider audience, particularly an audience who are perhaps equally or perhaps much more intelligent on the subject that you are currently researching on. So when you speak with them, when you deal your negotiation with them, when you place your research paper in the hands of such informed readers, your synthesis matters, your skill for synthesis matters. Why? This synthesis actually surfaces from a sense of a deep knowledge of literature, which means you're going to be much, much more familiar with the existing literature. And with that deeply rooted knowledge base, that you should start your synthesis. And remember, though it is your deep knowledge of literature that triggers your synthesis, actually, you are filtering it to decide what is essential for the reader. Now, you are the one who choose what is essential for the reader. You get? So, true that you know a lot about the subjects. That's one thing. Out of the many things that you know about the subject, you are going to carefully select the essentials that you are going to project on your reader. And this is a critical synthesis. This is what we call your ability to synthesize the necessary or rather more demanding thing that your reader is expecting out of the many things that you know. So we've been talking about two skills so far now. The ability to reframe, because you're going to talk about something that others are speaking already, others are talking already, others are researching already and publishing here and there. And at the same time, you trigger your synthesis with a deep-rooted knowledge of literature, but you are the sole proprietor of this whole knowledge, and you are going to carefully select what matters for your reader. So this ability of choosing the essential for your reader is a must when you're doing your synthesis. And let's move on to the third skill that you have to have. So you know literature, and from the literature, you know the wider, bigger picture of the whole story that you're going to say in your research. You have to ensure that you possess a skill to choose relevant data. Now you see, background info that you add to your introduction, actually they should be appealing to the specific objectives of your paper. Now, background could be a wider, deeper, lengthier background, but still, you should be able to relate your background directly to the specific objectives of your paper. You have never ever thought that before you sit down for writing an introduction, you should have this much of skills. You never, didn't you? So you now know your role. What's it? You are going to actually narrate a new story on top of an ongoing story, which means amid the many literature, amid the many researchers who are publishing on your industry, on your discipline, you are going to say the same thing, but in a different, novel, intriguing way. That is reframing ability. And secondly, knowing a lot, you choose essential facts that the reader should know, which is coming as part of your synthesis ability. And finally, the info and background that you place in your writing are specific, they are directly channeling the specific objectives of campaign. Right. With that, we'll be moving to the next aspect. So, what is the first thing of doing this whole business? Hmm? The first thing is to whom you're going to write, knowing your audience. Just look at the reality that I have highlighted here in the slide. Imagine yourself. Imagine yourself. When you start reading articles, imagine the kind of level, or rather the level of knowledge you had on the particular field. When you start reading the first article from your field, you were a very novice, inexperienced researcher. Can you remember? Maybe having read a lot and having written a lot, you are now a master of reading and writing act, but keep in mind that your audience includes people of that level. They could be. Never ever imagine that all of your readers are experts, or rather field experts or professors or scientists of the field. They can be the very novice, just beginning researchers of the field. So you have to keep that in mind. For them, actually, you should you should not assume that they know everything that you know and that you're going to present in your article. So you have to be able to provide enough explanation, enough references when you are mentioning specific notions. Particularly, you are pitching the niche terminology, you have to be very careful. You have to be actually, you have to give explanation and reference when you are originally mentioning your niche terminology. And when you're taking a specific notion into your background introduction, you have to keep in mind that providing them is a must. This is simply, you are simply acknowledging your reader's level of intelligence. Maybe if he is a person who knows all the definitions about a particular subject that you're writing, but still by giving an explanation on which direction of definitions that you are going to deal in the introduction, when you provide that explanation, your much non-expert reader is also going to be with you in the journey. And if he's not much of a versatile reader who has got nothing much about the very literature, but still he will also be getting an idea, explanation about your uh, research paper when you come to know about your audience. I wish you get the point. Don't assume that your reader knows your labs of jargon, your jargon lab, your terminology, your key terms may be much, much, much more a familiar thing to you, but don't ever assume that everyone knows it, right? Okay, that's the first aspect of your introductory writing skill. Well, now let's take this into the actual reality in publishing industry. That's it. Before your reader reads your story, actually, if you're trying an article in a journal, you have to first tackle the referee. You have to first tackle the one who reviews your article, right? So these are typically the things that referees hate. What are they? Too long relative to the paper. Now we are talking about the introduction alone, right? If you are going to make a too long relative to the paper in your introduction, maybe referees might think that, wow, my God, this guy can't come into the point directly with the top-notch definition of it. So they might hate not might hate, actually, it says that they hate too long relative to the paper. The second thing that they hate is, this disorganized section. Say, for example, this is about introductory section. If your introductory section itself is not properly organized, leading one point to the other, moving from general to specific, if it does not move in such a way, this disorganized section might be putting the referee's mind in a bleak attitude towards you, because disorganized introduction is a clear mirror for a disorganized paper, right? And one thing particularly referees hate is if you do not place your rationale correctly, or rather, if you do not uh, define properly your objectives in the very first place of your introduction, referees hate them. So, getting through the referee's gate is the first thing. Avoid what they hate, right? Carefully organize the section, right? And carefully define your rationale and objective, and simply traverse through the gates of the referees with comfort, giving them what they like without giving them a hint of what they really hate. So, in this very case, let's look at very sensitively what these referees typically hate. Now, within your content, if it has too many general statements everyone knows, then your referee is going to say, oh, well, there is nothing new. It's something quite simple, And if you simply cut and paste things from introduction and simply drop it here in the cut and paste from the abstract and simply put it there in the introduction, you see, your referee senses it and they hear it. And if your introduction hasn't got the structure of the paper, which I told you at the very onset, what's it? The roadmap. If there is no mentioning of your paper structure, referees typically drop your paper in the bin, sending a default, what we call, rejection desk message. So keep in mind, these things matter a lot when you are trying to get the gate pass from the referee or the reviewer. Well, now I want to know whether you have got what I was discussing. I want somebody to speak to me one thing. What is it? What is it? Not this particular thing, but I'm referring to the things that we have discussed so far. What we have discussed? Yep. Okay. So just send me in a quick text chat, or rather, just open your mic and say, typically, if you could reflect back on any of the times that your paper was rejected, out of the many papers or one paper that was rejected, which you happen to send, can you remember what they have mentioned as a central defect or rather flaw in your research paper? I want someone to come up with, your first-hand experience on rejection message received on your what? On your paper. Shall I invite one of you, or rather shall I wait for the volunteers to speak? Chamath, are you there? Can you remember, have you written and have you got any rejection notification on your papers so far? And if so, what is it? Yes, Shamath, what is it? On what grounds that they said your paper was rejected?
So the structure of the paper is incorrect,
Mm-hmm.
does not conform to the journal requirement form, and that kind of a message frequently we can get.
Okay. Thank you, Subhashini, for introducing your voice first. Yeah, of course, yes. If you do not follow the structure of, you know, the journal's structural features, if you are not writing in their style, they are going to simply reject it. Okay, that's Subhashini's experience. What about the others? Can you remember the rejection desk messages that you received in your inbox after careful writing up? Yes, Chamath responds me. Got one from a conference due to experiment not having a proper uncertainty analysis. Okay, so
I
you are
have
lucky in that sense, Chamath, because they happen to look at the very experiment you have done, but they see that there is a necessary uncertainty analysis which you missed. Therefore, they rejected. Okay. Rangana shares with me, I got a major revision because of having three different aims in different places. Wow. You see, inconsistency. You indicate one aim at a point, maybe at the introduction, and you refer to a different aim towards the discussion. You see? Quite simple. Well,
I also
that's why.
have an experience, sir.
Yeah, Pramoda.
From the beginning of my research writing, like repeating text in everywhere, like
Mhm.
introduction and literature review, and then same thing repeating. It was there in the introduction as well, something like that. I received.
Well, so Pramoda, the case is like you, or perhaps better than you, the reviewer knows about your subject. So when you're going to refer the same thing here and there and everywhere, oh my God, what a nonsense. That's how they feel. Yeah. You see, these are very good lessons that you all can share. I want to hear from a couple of you further. Any experience, my dear friends, on the rejection of your manuscript from any article, any journal?
Our the
Sometimes
research papers were rejected.
Yeah, Mahesh, go ahead.
Yes, the Emerald BPM, the journal, the reviewers, they rejected the two papers due to poor literature review. Sometimes, if the literature review, they not the match with research gaps, they rejected it. Therefore, the proper literature review is essential.
True. And Mahesh, keep in mind
Sometimes,
that,
if they mention general statements, they mention that one is not matched with proper literature review. That's our experience.
yeah, that's why if you could remember at the very beginning, I said, you have to have a very critical ability to synthesize because you're writing to an informed audience. They know. So when they know, if you indicate that you don't know what they know, is a critical point where you will be rejected. Well, I could hear from someone else who overlapped with Mahesh. A lady, can you speak, please? I could not detect your name.
So sometime when we are submitting to the Q1 journals, they are always saying that there's no any innovative contribution in manuscript, so we can't accept this kind of comments. Also, we can get so.
So true. Now, maybe the very finding that you reached could be very fascinating to you, but it's a well known or rather well-researched thing out there in the bigger world. That again tells how poor you are in terms of the status quo of the subject, right? So these are typical rejection experiences. I am willing to give one more chance, and in the meantime, I'm reading what Dharani said. In previous submissions, feedback indicated that the results required more detailed elaboration and the methodology needed to be more strongly interpreted and articulated. Yes, because this is scientific method. They want method very strongly, and of course, more detailed elaboration on your discussion and method. Yeah, thank you. And this one also shares his experience. The research gap and contribution were not clearly articulated. Maybe you have identified a particular research gap in your paper, but the same literature can show up a very big different picture of the research gap which you did not detect, right? So keep in mind that you are trying with a tricky crowd who knows the subject perhaps better than you. Therefore, be careful, right? Okay. Okay. So I can give one more chance for someone else to speak. I like very much for you to bring your experiences because, when I take my experiences, you'll be getting lots of experiences from humanities, not from STEM, right? It will simply, dilute your interest. I don't like that to happen. That's why I always invite you to bring your experience. And one of the key philosophies of my teaching is I think that I am representing just 0.1% of the whole knowledge. And if we consider all of you contribute 1% each, when 10 of us contributes, it's going to make 10% of the whole thing, right? So it's not the teacher alone. It's not the one who preaches from my end here alone that should develop this dialogue. It should be, nurtured by your contribution as well. Well, we'll take those contributions in our future time. Now you know a little bit about the introduction. Now, with all that you come to know so far, I'm asking you a question. Can you see? What role does the introduction perform in your paper? What role does the introduction perform in your paper? List 3 things that you expect to achieve by your introduction section. Type and send it in chat. Take about 2 to 3 minutes. Now you are a bit informed about the introduction and its purpose and the toolkits that you should have there while writing introduction, and tell me, list 3 things that you expect to achieve by your introduction, by writing your introduction. Now we are assuming this here, the writer's shoes. Now you are going to be in writer's shoes and you are going to say me what 3 things that you expect to achieve in your introduction. Take 3 minutes, 1 minute for one aspect, and drop me your message. I'm thankful to those who have responded. Yes. I'm waiting for others also to respond. I'm silently reading your write-ups, right? What you sent here. I don't read it loud because the others writing might be interrupted with it. I'm waiting for something that you all have missed. You all are talking about things, yes, they are really, really, really relevant, but out of the things that I have mentioned there's one thing that you have forgotten, or rather you haven't thought to be really significant. I actually got what I was expecting from Rashila. Rashila, can you detect what I was expecting? You can refer to your answer and tell me what do you think that I was mostly expected of.
Should be the novelty of the paper.
Not particularly, but it comes a little earlier. In your answer, it comes earlier. Yes.
Research tool is used?
You're a bit deviating, but Rangan has correctly said it. You have to indicate the roadmap. And roadmap is not just a random thinking that comes into your mind. When you write the introduction, you might now detect that introduction cannot be written at the very first sitting, right? Now, it's quite simple. You look at the very status quo of the field of research and you position your research somewhere in that big story and you tell your outcome, what you expect to achieve, and you tell in a very precise way, this is how I'm going to achieve it in this paper in this order, right? So the roadmap is an essential thing. I think though you haven't watched the cartoon series Dora, the children's cartoon series, I'm sure your children might have watched this as one of their favorites, right? One thing that Dora keeps in her backpack is the map, right? So every story begins with map. The same way, your introduction should come with the proper map, and this map should be something very clearly planned and nicely articulated in your introduction. Well, I wish everyone is trying to send me the 3 things that you wish to achieve while writing your introduction. While you keep on sending your answers, let me move on. Or rather, I'll give you 1 minute for others to send it. Thank you. Let's move ahead. Now, the very chapter that I am basing whole discussion today's lecture will be shared after this. I could only share the synopsis early in the morning. I'll upload the chapter as well for you all to refer further. In that particular article by Walsh, particular chapter by Walsh, he tells that your introduction answers 5 essential questions in a particular order. What are they? You can see it on screen. What is the problem? What are the existing solutions for that problem? Which solution is the best out of the existing? What is not found among the solutions? And what you hope to achieve after doing this particular research. And the last, which is not indicated here, is how you do it. So that is how the roadmap is brought into your discussion. So 5 essential questions that you typically answer in your introduction in what the hell is the problem? Then what existing solutions are there and which is the best solution? And to answer the problem, where a gap exists which is not yet surfaced as a solution, and you say how you achieve that thing. You see, it's a simple story of these answers to these 5 questions. That is your introduction. Do you guys have anything to add on to this little simple point? It answers 5 questions in order. What is the order? It is the order given in the slides. What are the questions that you answer there? See, Wallace has seen the big picture of her introduction. Don't you sense it? Don't you sense it, my dears? Quite simply, there is a problem. There are answers here and there for the same problem. The existing best answer is this, but still there is yet to answer. That is what I am going to do here. And here I am achieving it. Here the way I am achieving it. So this is what you typically write in your introduction. Don't you see that we are actually deconstructing a bigger research article into little parts starting from introduction to methods, results and discussion, and so on. Now, today we are actually deconstructing the introduction. And in introduction, we are going to see how holistically introduction could be answering 5 questions. What is the problem? What are the existing solutions and which are the best solutions presently available? But even though there is a best solution, what lacks in that solution, or rather what other solutions could be better replacing the best in the field? And that is your literature gap, that's your gap. And you say how and what you hope to achieve by doing so. Give me a thumbs up if you simply understand, wow, how simple it is. If you got that notion of wow, give me a thumbs up. If not, you don't need to give me a thumbs up. Thank you. There are 4 thumbs ups. At least 4 of you have. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on. Now, when you approach your introduction, Walsh actually brings us a 10-part framework in which he says, they are following that particular sequence, right? And perhaps not all 10, but they are typically following this sequence. What are they? It starts with the definition, which sets the background, right? And then your problem and problem state of the art, which means status quo as at now, where this problem lies. And then you clearly pin there what objectives you are trying to achieve. And then you introduce to the literature, and then you're going to highlight what contribution you are going to add, the bigger aim of your research, and then your main research, future implications, and structure outline. So you see, there are certain points that I have put with asterisks and in bold letter. They are typically the demanding, most essential for every discipline. But in your introduction, take this 10-part framework, which will certainly guide you through how to write a better introduction, because this would serve as a sort of a checklist, whether you have done it in that particular sequence. If you have done it in the particular sequence, which means you are correctly channeling the nerve of the reader, nerve of your reviewer, nerve of the scientific community who are reading your research. So we have navigated through some strategies so far, and we'll go forth and see this in a case study. XYZ battery. Now, we'll take that some particular institute is going to create an XYZ battery, right? Now, how you develop your introduction. Think of this scenario. We will now walk through the 10 parts which we discussed in the earlier slide. These are the 10 parts, and we are going to take how these 10 parts are going to be in this XYZ battery case. Yeah. XYZ batteries. At the beginning, I'm advising you pay attention to how the author moves from general to specific aims. Now, you see, in your introduction, you are the writer and you are the author, and you have to narrate or rather escort your reader from general context to a specific aim that you're going to achieve in your research. See, in this particular example of XYZ battery, how the author moves from this general context to aims in a very creative trajectory, in a very creative journey. Let's move on and see. The first step, XYZ battery. What is the author's text? Read it by yourself and see the role it performs and try to digest. So you sense that without going here and there, the writer is just jumping into the central idea. That's it. XYZ battery. Okay. He defines the topic and he starts with including notations and technical definitions at the very onset. ABC battery is a battery that, so you explain, the electrodes in XYZ battery, telephone battery, are made of composite of gold, silver, coated with a layer of platinum. The gold and silver provide structural support. You go ahead. You see? So very clear, and we'll move on and see how these 10 parts of the introduction is typically followed in this particular scenario. Second part. First part is definition, where he sets the definition. The second half is setting the problem. You see, the performance of the battery can be strongly affected by the number of times the battery is charged. The battery is subjected to 3 possible failure modes. Now you see, it's a story of battery, a new battery with new electrodes. Okay. And why battery? Because the existing batteries have a problem. Okay. And the most problematic area of the battery is this. Okay. You see? From general battery to specific problems associated in batteries. You get? And this tells why you choose it particularly, and it convinces your reader why it is going to be important. Well, so that's step 2, and we'll move on to step 3, where you actually locate your objective. Here you outline how you intend to fill the gap. You might see that this is a transition from your literature to the gap you identified. Look at what it says. A research program has recently been started by the authors in collaboration with a major battery manufacturer with the goal of developing new design models. Analytical techniques are needed that can predict this and that. Do you see? What happens? You simply tell how you're going to fill the gap that you identified early in the second step. And remember that this is coming as a result of your vast reading of the other literature. By reading the rest of the literature, you locate your point here, how we are going to do it, specifying your objectives. Friends, are you following me? Are these 10 steps making sense? Okay, go ahead. What is the next point? Now we jump into the literature, XYZ battery. Computational techniques have been extensively applied, in particular with regard to the number of times a battery is charged. However, little research to date has focused on the length of each individual recharge. Now, the number of recharges is a concern, but a very particular data, how long the length of individual recharge has not been a concern so far. You see? Which actually refer to the insufficiency of current literature where your work is going to fill the gap. You get? So little by little, highlighting your gap, you introduce what? The literature on the topic that you are discussing. Well, let's move on and we'll see what's the fifth. Yeah, introduction to literature. Now here, out of the 10 steps, I typically took the highlighted 4 steps, right? It's narrated through those 4 steps. There are 10 different steps, but it's holistically narrated through these 4 steps. Let me revisit the 4. We are referring to these highlighted 2, 3, 6, and 7 in the 10 step. And yes, XYZ battery definition, problem, objectives, and introduction to literature. So this is how you begin your introduction. Look at the text in part 4, previous slide. You see, computational techniques have been extensively applied, in particular with regard to the number of times a battery is charged. However, you see, this particular word is really, really important. Why? There where you indicate where the void lags, where the research gap labs, and where you're going to fill. We call this the pivot word. This actually signals the gap in knowledge, and often these words are typically appealing to your reviewers as well as your fellow researchers, because they're where you show them where there exists a gap. Because what is done is visible when you look around, but it is your critical thinking that brings up out of this what is non-existing. That's what you surface as your gap. Okay, let's move on. Now we are moving to literature survey in the part 5. So what happens? Moving ahead, literature survey goes on. More recent research has occurred. Evans studied, Smith and Jones found that, however, their findings failed to account for. Now you tell in your literature survey, these researchers found this and that, but you see, however, you see, pivot word, however, their findings failed to account for. So every time you refer to the rest of the literature, it should be your right and strength actually to pitch where you found the gap, right? And that is what actually makes your research matters to the rest of the world, because you particularly identified a gap where you fill. Yes. What is the role of this literature survey? Actually, it reviews the status quo of your field as at now, right? But it is not everything of every research that you're going to discuss, but you describe what is necessary for your paper, not for just, word count, but for your paper. Very good. Doesn't you actually bring what is the difference between literature intro and survey? Now, literature intro means, in your introduction, you identified some questions and now you invite these researchers, which means, at the very onset, you bring top leading researchers of your own field, which are sound to be interesting as at now, what we call the status quo, state of the art of your problem, that we indicate at a point. So we are moving into literature of these, and that. And then we survey, we simply indicate these research are being reviewed, and then you go into detail what A said, what B said, what C said, but not what all A said and not what all B said, but what is relevant for your field of your paper from A, B, C, and D researchers. Did I answer your question, sir? Lit intro and lit survey. Did I answer your question? Well, let's move on. What is part 6? Contribution. Now, you should now surface and pitch how your work represents an advance in the existing literature. Now, it is you who create knowledge, it is you who create solutions. And here, when you indicate your contribution, you say, oh my God, when my research comes in, the identified gap which I noted earlier are going to be filled, and this is how it's going to be filling, right? Look at the writer. To the best of our knowledge, there are no results in the literature regarding how the length of each recharge impacts on the silver and gold in the electrodes. You see, you clearly state how your particular work is going to represent an advancement of the existing literature. That's what we call contribution. And with that contribution, what you expect as a goal, your aim, right? And this typically comes in a separate paragraph, but see what it says. The aim of the present work is to construct a model to perform a comprehensive investigation of the effect of recharging and to find a new proportion in the amount of metals used. You see, the composition of electrodes, how it could be determined, and how it is going to be clearly related to the effect of recharging. You see, you set your aim where you show them the goal that you are going to set. And keep in mind that when you indicate your aim or goal, you have to move away from the existing paragraph and start that in a new paragraph. Well, 8, 9, and 10 steps of the introduction. Wonderful. You must be wondering, are we really indicating results, implications, and structure? Yes, of course. You have to give a clue, not the whole discussion of results, but you have to give the key result in the introduction itself and key implication it creates. And then you signal what I'm going to discuss next in the next section. You see, this is how, as I told you, how you escort, how you hold the hand of your reader and take him along the structure, or rather the map that you plan your research to be exposed. Hello, friends. Did you see that this little but very rigorous approach can actually ensure that you articulate your research to a wider audience in an appealing way? Give me a quick response whether the discussion up to now in this parts 1 to 10, whether you were able to find a wonderful plot for your narrative in the introduction. Not a wonderful, but actually a very sensible plot, how to narrate your story in your introduction. If you found it, just give me a comment. If you just say, yeah, we knew it, still tell it that, because then I know that it was not a new thing that you got. Just give me your response in a chat perhaps, or rather in voice. I would rather prefer you guys to speak, and then we'll be moving on to the next half of the discussion. Thank you, Pramoda. It's okay, Dasun. Yeah. No worries. Yeah, I'll be uploading as early as possible the recordings, then you'll be able to trace the answer. Yeah. And remember, why I do provide you with a plot structure here is, I know that you're a master of research, but narrating your story is a different mastery that you need to do. So I'm simply guiding you how to narrate your research story to incrementally and little by little in an interesting way, how it could be communicated to your new reader. Hope you got. Well, thank you, Aslam, Dazun, Pramoda, for your compliments. Well, with that, let's move further on slides. So we are going to do an activity. Structure puzzle. You see, you are given 25 minutes. Your task is reassemble the jumbled sentences on the right into the correct logical sequence, from general context to specific problem and then objective. You see A, B, C, and D. Reassemble the jumbled sentences on the right into a correct logical sequence. Now, when I say reassemble, it does not mean a CBDA structure. You have to put the sentence with what? Your own thoughts as well, connecting, linking them one to the other, right? Thank you, Kusal, for your compliment. No, Dazun, I'm not expecting you to connect this as CDAB, but I want you to logically construct it. You don't need 25 minutes to simply say what comes. If you want to see How fascinating. Could AI assist you in this? You can hand over the whole task to AI and ask it to do this task on behalf of you. But I want you to ask how AI can do it and how you can simply learn this shift from general context to specific problem objective. I want to see three things. Number one, how you actually prompt your AI to do this. That's number one. Number two, how you sense, you can indicate AI to show what specific turns that your synthesis takes to move from general context to specific problem and then to objective. Just take a little bit of time, not 25 minutes, actually about 5 to 7 minutes. Take 5 to 7 minutes and try to structure this puzzle, yeah, in a sensible way, from general context to specific problem and then to objective. And while you're going on doing this task, I'll be setting up the attendance taking pane out there in your. Thank you. Nilipul started sending. Don't worry, Pamoda. On attendance, actually, the attendance sheet, I do not manually change it, but in my log, I mark who came and you were updating me on WhatsApp as well. I kept a record of attendance, not on Moodle. In my own log, I have a record there. Your attendance is marked. No worries. Now, this attendance marking is not for my pleasure. It's actually, when you get here, engage with the discussion, and when you do these little but very interesting activities, you convince yourself how nicely you are mastering the art of writing research. And those who are engaging with me do know it, right? And those who do not know. Okay, take your time and draft this and send me it on chat. Now, friends, while you're doing this, you must be convincing yourself that organizing or logically connecting these sentences with pivot words, signaling what from where to where you're moving on with a clear sequence and yours with a clear flow is actually the secret behind an effective introduction. Well, thank you for making that effort. And with that, we'll be moving on to the next slide and we'll see what's up there. Now, case study 1, we actually looked at one way of doing introduction. What was it? We tried actually structuring puzzle from 10 steps, how the puzzle was structured from general context to specific problem and objective. And in this case study, we'll be looking at a totally different method. Now, in this case, what do they do is, it follows a curiosity arising approach on which they do Great. That's what I actually want from you all. What is it? When you learn through this activity with yourself, by yourself, or with the support of the generative AI, what is interesting is that you sense and you simply try to see how this particular narrative is sequenced by the language and pivot words, and by indicating those transition from general to specific with aim, that transition, that flow is actually the lesson that you have to learn. So let's move on to the second method of doing an introduction. I'm sure that when you learn these different methods, how you can try your introduction, I'm not going to actually drill you how to do this, but I'm simply showing you off how could this be done in different ways. And by doing so, what you're going to do is quite simply navigate different ways of doing your introduction, right? So we'll see what this alternative approach is. So let's look at the alternative approach, how it is done. Now remember, it's not every discipline, every subject that uses a standard structure. More than enough room for you to change, alter, and do innovations in your structure, right? And with that room for your innovation, what we are going to now look at is a different approach, different from what we have discussed so far. And this is actually from the dissertation by Chris Rozek on persistence, right? Okay. Some, particularly psychology-like researchers do use a series of questions along the narrative is done. So they raise questions and provide answer, and raise another question and provide answer, and go ahead, right? So this is also a good method for you to narrate your introduction. Therefore, let's discuss how it's done. Yeah, taking the case study 2. Look at. Now, in the question method, what we are doing here is we set the context. Look at sentence 1. Persistence is an attribute valued by many. Very general statement, but very direct to the point. Persistence. Topic is introduced. And remember, it is the very first word of the sentence as well. Very clear, precise, and to the point. And short sentences. How many words? 7 words. Now you see how effective it is to ensure your reader gets the crystal clear communication. Persistence is an attribute valued by many. In 7 words, the topic is introduced, giving immediate focus. That's how they set the context. And then the problem. What makes some people persist longer than others? Now you see, the topic is persistence. What makes some people persist longer than others? The question comes. He jumps directly to the question, invites the reader to think. And this is how Chris plans to outline the issue from topic to its trajectory. You see? Let's move and see. The problem is stated directly, and then he brings the hypothesis. Let's see. Fragmented text, but you see, are internal facts or external situational factors responsible? For that question set in the second sentence, he questions further. Are internal factors or external situational factors responsible? Which factor is responsible? Could the answer include a combination of both? Once again, leading to another question. These are the questions this experiment attempted to answer. You see? Why I do take this psychology introduction to discuss this whole thing is to show you the bigger room left for you to do lots of creative experiment in your write-up. Let's go back to the slides view fast. They are very short, and we'll read the sentences alone. Persistence is an attribute valued by many. What makes some people persist longer than others? Are internal factors or external situational factors responsible? Could the answer include a combination of both? These are the questions this experiment attempted to answer. How nicely, precisely, and very plain language, how the writer knits his research question, how he brings the topic and research question and hypothesis. These are creative ways of setting up, drafting your introduction. Don't you see? It will be interesting. Genuinely give me your response, but before that, we'll be moving on and see what next slide has got to say. Yeah? What do you feel about this question method? Short, but it's going to be very precise and to the point. Give me your genuine response on your impression on that. Yeah, Dazun. Not only when writing a book. Yes, this is how this guy happens to do his experiment in his research paper. It worked actually, right? When you are not only on writing a book, but you see, it makes a very logical flow from one to the other end, making it much appealing. But once again, remember, though I taught you the 10 steps procedure and then the question method and all that, keep in mind that none of these methods do in isolation work for your article to be published. First thing that you have to do is to refer to the particular journal and refer to some of its articles and find the style they prefer and alter, augment your style to fit into that style. So that is simply the secret formula. Keep that in mind, but I'm discussing with you a couple of strategies to enlighten you on different strategies that you can use to craft your introduction like a classy Q1 most referred article introduction. Well, so why use questions? Did you ever question this? It's because you are in a dialogue with your reader. So there is often momentum in involvement between you and the reader. It encourages the reader to formulate their own answers before you provide yours. And it actually is part of the brevity of his text or other texting or other writing. It covers context, issues, and likely findings in very few sentences. Brevity in the sense you tell it in very essence, very brief, very short episodes, but quite directly and very strongly. That is brevity. And the next thing is it actually focuses much to reader. Reader cannot diverge from what you're discussing. Reader's focus is going to be connected from one to the other, keeping his focus on the context, from one context to another, switching them immediately. So this is why questions do matter in. Yes, Dasun. Yeah, what you're telling is quite right. Yes. That's why I told you that it's the way that psychology papers go on. But I just showed you to indicate that there is a room between very structured 10 steps and this kind of a question type structured ways. It's not the two ends, but in between there is a very huge quantum space on which you can do a lot of experiments in terms of your writing art. Well, so using questions is an effective way of setting your introduction much more appealing, involving keeping your brevity exhibited, ensuring the focus of the reader entangled in the point you're discussing. So we are going to do a little activity. Now this is about summarizing. Now here we are going to summarize the gap. We discussed the gap in we have discussed this activity here, right? And we are going to get that into what? Summarizing the gap statement. Now, I want you to do it by yourself without the support of what? NAI. Write a single paragraph combining part 2 and part 6 contribution. That's what you do. Part 2 is your problem and part 6 is contribution. If you know the problem that you're going to answer in your question research, And if you know what contribution you are going to give, this all together, these two together creates the summary of the gap you're going to fill, right? So you take nearly 5 to 7 minutes to do this task. Write a single paragraph combining part 2 and part 6. While just try to follow this particular style and go back to the very exercise of the drawn case we were doing, right? Drawn stability, and try to fill a gap statement summary. I'm giving you about, a couple of minutes to try this. You see, look at the example. While is effective for this and these conditions, it fails to address particular condition, which is the gap. In this work, we overcome this limitation by you tell your solution. This is how most effective introductory narratives are written. Try to get your drawn story into a summarized gap. Sorry, friends, I took a little more time. Thank you for those who have made an attempt. I'm back here. I'm here live. Yes. Now, tell me, those who have attempted, doesn't it make a sense for you to understand these strategic ways, which are clearly simple, but you might say that very logical, and it adds to your brevity of expression. And this brevity is actually the thing that makes your writing is correctly pitched and touched to the nerves of the reader. So with that, we'll be moving to the next slides. Thank you very much for making the attempt. Did you ask any questions there in your responses? No, you were simply submitting your answers. Well, I'm glad that most of you are taking this as a simple moment where you invest your time on applying the strategies we discuss here in the classroom. Well, perfect. Now, we actually have covered something that not really typical in a research communication classroom, but we actually took them into much more into a discussion of actual knowledge, skills, and technologies available around us. And with those, what we are trying here in this module is to ensure that we make use of the best of the best tools and strategies, and we are going to craft our own research writing into project, to project you are writing into a high-end journal. So with that, we are moving into case 3, the spaghetti paper. This is by Audley and Newkirch. The title is Fragmentation of Rods by Cascading Cracks. Why spaghetti does not break in half. Here we are going to look at a comparison between abstract and the introduction, because you might notice that abstract is typically one thing that we set as the front matter of the research paper or the research article. It is actually a separately standing front matter which has clearly connections to the big research, but still abstract alone can stand as a meaningful entity to tell some gist about your story. But abstract and introduction are distinct in many ways, and we are going to look at how abstract and introduction are going to be distinct in many ways. Look at the abstract. Read with me. While you're reading, focus on the specific topic and goal immediately. There is no background info, no references. Where? In an abstract, keep in mind that an abstract focuses on the specific topic and goal. It does not give any background information, but sometimes some abstracts come with a bit of a background, but it has to be just direct and straightforward background. And in an abstract, you don't use references, right? That is a standalone gist summary of your big research paper. Let's read. When thin brittle rods such as dry spaghetti pasta are bent beyond their limit curvature, they often break into more than 2 pieces. When thin brittle rods such as dry spaghetti pasta are bent beyond their limit curvature, they often break into more than 2 pieces. This is the abstract, and we'll see how the introduction comes. Now, in the introduction, what you see is, actually it sets the general context, and it brings the general context into a broader scope. And introduction is a place where you can bring in references, but not in abstract. See the difference. I'm reading the spaghetti paper introduction. You see, the physical process of fragmentation is relevant to several areas of science and technology. It has mainly been studied from a statistical viewpoint. You see, in introduction, fragmentation is taken directly, but still, you see, there is a huge difference between this abstract and the introduction. The abstract simply says in abstract words, thin brittle rods, when they are bent beyond their limit curvature, they often break into more than two pieces. But you see, when it comes to the introduction, he goes on to establish this introduction with a broader scope, with references bringing into the discussion and setting it very strongly. And what we have to actually learn from this abstract and introduction thing. I will set it as a question. I'll set it as a question in chat for everyone to answer, right? My question is, distinguish an abstract from an introduction in one sentence. It's your turn now to do this task. What's it? You have to distinguish an abstract from an introduction in one sentence. You are given just one sentence length to distinguish between what is an abstract and what is an introduction. We did not learn much about abstract, but you know already. But we talked about introduction and what we do there. Now, keeping the two segments separately, the front matter, abstract, and the first aspect of research paper, the first section, introduction. If you keep the two things side by side, what distinguishes abstract from introduction and what distinguishes abstract from introduction and vice versa? I'm giving you 2 minutes to put that into one single sentence and send it to me. Thanks, Aslam. That's a good way to look at, yes. Thanks, Dasun. Yes. Thanks, Larani. Very detailed. Yes, Subhashini. That's it. Risma, yes, but introduction is not simply the background alone. Yes, Rangana. True, true, true. You are true, Binura. Well, that's a good way of telling, yes. Kusal? Yeah. Marisha, yes, right. If it is your thought, yes, excellent. Yes, Pasan. Okay, while the others send us the one sentence distinction between abstract and introduction, let's look at uh, how the pivot and expansion comes in introduction from expanding from the abstract. Just look at the link word, nevertheless, right? A simple experiment is presented. That's abstract. Look at the introduction. What do they do there? In an abstract, it's a simple experiment which is presented. And in an introduction, experiment is described in detail, set up its general mechanism, and it as quite rightly said by whom I can't remember who said it quite rightly. Yes, as Kusal says, it author simply brings science from abstract to introduction. Well, so if you compare the two, rule of thumb, what is the rule of thumb? If your abstract is 116 words long, your introduction could be twice that, ideally. But it can be varied depending on the article, journal, and the very publisher that you're targeting at. But in abstract, you have to tell the entire story in a nutshell. But in introduction, you simply set the ground for revealing your whole experiment. So it tells basically, once again, a summary of the whole thing, but with a cornerstone laid, or rather with a foundation stone laid. Well, if you just look at the word count comparison, you can understand how they are. In 116 words, it's going to be the revelation of the entire journal or research article or the study itself. But in introduction, it's going to be perhaps 1/5 of the big article, where in introduction, twice the word count of an abstract, one states the foundation for revealing his research narrative. In the meantime, I'm receiving answers. Thank you. And your answers make sense to me as well as it makes sense for you, because when you compare these concepts together, you realize how convincingly they are creeping into your brain, and how nicely they are registering in your brain. Well, let's move. Now we are going to look at the language skills required for all that. We actually looked at strategies, looked at the genre patterns, or rather the engineering aspect of how thoughts could be engineered in an introduction. Now we'll be looking at the stock phrases, which is the language skills. Yeah. Here on the left, you see avoid, what you should avoid, recent advances in. When you say recent, it is not precise. We don't know, right? The last few years, yeah, it indicates now 2025 might be, with this guy is referring for 2020 to 2025. If you can precisely tell the last 5 years starting from 2020, so that it's very precise. So make sure that you do not bring this don't let your referee find it tedious to digest this with, simple terms like recent advances, recent research finds, right? Well, what you should do, the best thing that you have to do is you have to begin very directly in the sense, the physical process of, here, the example, the physical process of fragmentation is relevant to spaghetti example, right? So you do not go around, you begin it directly because this is scientific communication, crystal clear communication, and of course, telepathic communication in which no suspension, no divergence, no what we call waiting for the truth to arrive in a snail's walk, but truth bluntly jumps into scientific writing. That's how they begin directly, and that's how the brevity is achieved in scientific writing. And if you look at the tenses, these are not new things, but I think will be helpful for you. Now, we invite you to begin with present simple for the introduction. Why? It's about what you know as facts already, right? The physical process of fragmentation is relevant to. Why? Because we are referring at this very moment, referring to the status quo, state of the art of the very field, and it's about the present condition that we are discussing. And our discussion is also going to be live when you are going to use present simple. And you can use present perfect tense when you're discussing from one point of your literature review, maybe one point in the past up to now. If you're revealing the research trajectory during that time, present perfect tense would do, right? Use this to show how a problem has been approached from the past until today. Persistence has most often been studied in terms of, you see, present perfect is actually from past up to today, how something has been approached or something has been evolved. If you want to reveal that, you can use the present introduction. And the other thing is, very simply, when you move on to the paper's plan, I told you it's one of the core elements of your introduction. Use present simple, right? What will you do in this paper? So, for example, in this paper, examine how this, you see? So simple present tense is going to be the best form for you to indicate, signal your paper's plan. Now, this is the plan of the paper, right? How the paper is organized. And for findings and hypotheses, that is also part of your research introduction. You can use past simple when you present new findings. Your specific contribution could be indicated in past simple because by now you have revealed it to the world. It adds to past, but that is coming in introduction as your own finding. And if you are dealing with hypothesis, it is something that they set as a pre-assumption which they are going to prove right or wrong. You see, hypothesis is typically confined to where the author said to prove a hypothesis, which is typically sensible with future tense. We will show greater task persistence. Well, we are moving the tense hunt. You have a little task to do. Identify every verb in the text and explain why that tense was chosen. Now there are 3 sentences, and each sentence has a central verb phrase, and identify it and say why. Look at solar energy is a renewable source. It is in present tense. Why? By now, Solar energy, being a renewable resource, is a fact known to everyone. You get the point. And look at the second. However, efficiency has remained low. Has remained low. Why? This efficiency matter of the solar as a renewable source is a topic under exploration even at now. So you refer to some past where its efficiency research began and you talk up to now, and the trajectory might continue. So the whole trajectory from past to present is the purpose here. That's why that it is presented in present perfect. And look at the third. We demonstrate a new method that increased output. Now this is an introduction, right? In this study demonstrate a new method that increased output. You see, it's written in demonstrate. In present tense, we report it. And increased, it is our finding. We locate it therein. Right? So I did not let you do the task. I simply explained how it comes in. But let's move on and see. Look at outlining structure. Original version and revised version. Aim for conciseness, because every time you have to tell things in lesser words, which we call the economy. Look, the paper is structured as follows. In section 2A, survey of the works related to X is provided. Passive, wordy, and it has 84 words in total. Look at the revised version. Section 2 surveys the works related to X. Look at the number count, half almost. It's very active and very concise. So when you are outlining, your structure should be actually precise and active, and of course, less wordy, because a research article is a space given in a very limited space of a Q1 journal, and in which if you are going to try many a word, it's not a place where word displays. It's a place where your knowledge displays. And if your knowledge could be displayed there with lesser the word, easier that to reach the reader, and of course to position space from that journal. So this brevity, conciseness is a very, very significant aspect in your writing. Well, if you were to improve conciseness, there are things that, that you can simply alter. The first thing is redundancy, which we call deletion of certain things. If you simply go back to this example, this paper is structured as follows, right? Section 2A, survey the works related to X. You see, this paper is structured as follows. We reduce it and we simply say section 2 surveys. We indicate what section 2 is. We don't need to tell that I am revealing you the structure. You just reveal the structure, right? පොතේ ගුරාලා නැතුව අපි කෙලිම කතන්දරේ කියනවා. So here, redundancy means you delete inappropriate words there. And look at the verb. You use active verbs, surveys, rather than we did a survey, it says surveys. And look at the verbosity, which means lots of verbs. Experience in the application of the tool. Experience in the application of the tool. You see, it's very wordy, but applying the tool, it tells the whole thing. You see? So redundancy and verbs instead of its noun form or its very wordy expression and verbosity are aspects that you can apply to improve your concise writing. And I'm inviting you to use your non-generative AI to give you more examples of this nature where explain me redundancy by taking a simple explanation from a scientific article. You can ask your generative AI to teach you what is redundancy and then ask generative AI to explain how to do that, right? It will provide you with enough support rather than simply getting your answer for your question from generative AI. Just get the way to find the answer from it, right? You get? Okay, let's move. Now, most of the things appeal actively when it's written in actively. So active powers your writing, right? But once again, I'm advising if a particular journal prefers passive, don't try to be active fan. Be a fan of passive when you're trying that particular journal, right? But still, in general, active voice actually it powers the sentences, right? An analysis of X is very powerful. We analyze X. Well, I'm sorry that I happen to use singular alone. Let's move on. So you are looking at the roadmap now. When you come to the roadmap, this self-assessment will be helpful for you to correctly pitch it up, right? When you finish your introduction, you have to go to this checklist. See whether the research question is clearly stated. Does my introduction act as a roadmap to my whole journal article or paper? Is it distinct from the abstract? These three facts have to be triggered because they are set as a checklist, because this is actually the gate pass from your reviewer, right? To get the gate pass, you cannot simply put something in abstract and simply duplicate that as a pasted verbatim copy in the introduction, right? A clear research question with a clear roadmap in the introduction, distinct from abstract, that is what makes an introduction perfect. And on content, the checklist is this. How I mention only what reader need to know. Refer. Now, you must be having lots of knowledge, but you have to very carefully select what reader should know. As a matter of fact, mention only the facts that reader must know is your choice, and that's how you organize your write-up. And see whether every piece of info links to the discussion. Now, when you bring an information into your discussion, it should be sustaining the discussion, not something diverging, diluting, or distorting the idea in the discussion. And see the third checklist point, have I been as concise as possible? Could I make it more concise and brief and brave? That is where you make the content pitched perfectly. And one of the most important thing, as I often practice with you through these workshops, is peer review. Now consider your team as a collective team working for each other. Goodness. There is a competition for your individual merit. But individual merit competition could be sharpened, fine-tuned when you work as a group, particularly in peer reviewing. When you write something, why don't you give it to whom? A peer who is of your field, maybe from a different field, right? If you give it to a similar field person, he will give you a very technically sound analysis of the whole thing, making it much more perfect. And if he's from a different discipline, still it gives how your paper is appealing to a person who knows not the subject. So whoever your peer is, maybe someone known to your field or not known to your field, every feedback is simply relevant and of course significant. Swap drafts with a partner, use a checklist in the right. Now, when you're doing this peer review, use the checklist given here. No stock prices. The gap is clear. Cut and paste is not there from abstract. Tenses follow rules. Tenses are there to follow rules because each tense has a purpose. And if the tense's purpose is the purpose of your discussion, then take that tense into it. Right? Well, that's it. And we are moving to the next. Cut and paste check. Now remember, often place the abstract and introduction side by side. Highlight any identical sentences. This is once again gate pass from your reviewer. The very goal is you should not simply duplicate abstract in the introduction. You can simply duplicate the ideas, but not the wording, right? Rewrite them in the introduction to provide context, not just repetition. Do not let repetition happens between abstract or in any part of the other episodes of your research, because it serves often as simply a disadvantage for your paper. Well, we are coming to the last few minutes of the discussion. Yes, it's 10:32. I'll be finishing in 5 minutes. Well, the rule of grammar, or rather grammar rule summary is this. When you deal with background, you use present simple, whereas when you deal with past to present solutions, which you review through your literature, perhaps present perfect, and past simple when you indicate your contribution and finding, right? So that is the summary of grammar rules. And the final principle, define early. Before you study anything, any write-up, any development of your research article, particularly definition should be done early. Definitions, notations, right? They should be done in advance of your research paper, and they should be indicated and added at the very beginning of your research, so that makes a new reader get ready for digesting your research article. I did not add any attendance made available. I'm sorry. And I'll find how to take attendance today. I have seen nearly 58 of you hanging around. Well, so the final principle is, if you have any definitions, notations, abbreviations, or anything, guiding the novice readers, indicate them well in advance in your introduction and ensure there is a logic link. There is a logical thread between background info to your objective. Now, when you start with the background and then reveal a bit of the history and then reveal the status of the art of that particular field and your objective, and make a logical link between those episodes. And what is important and most prominent is you should highlight the research gap, because it is the thing that makes your study very unique. So never, well, I'll answer your question, Dasun, and when I finish this. Highlighting the gap is very, very significant, because typically it's the hot spot of your research paper. When you clearly highlight the gap, your reviewer gets your research gap and he compares it with the rest of the research and find, oh yes, he's truly filling a gap. When it is traced, your abstract, your article is passed through the whole process of gatekeep, or rather, desk selection. So these are simple strategies that you can follow. And let me answer the question raised by Dazun. Yeah. His point is there a standard ratio for how long the introduction should be compared to the total length of the paper? There is no such a rigid ratio, but to tell you precisely, if the abstract, you can simply have a ratio between abstract and introduction, not the rest of the paper. If they invite 100 words abstract, you better do not go beyond 250 words introduction, right? But once again, still, we can't teach this is how it should be done. Actually, you have to refer to the particular journal and see how the other papers appear there and the length of them, right? So that typically is because, journal to journal, publication to publication, a symposium to symposium, a publisher to another, their genres, their preferences are different. So study it in the context. Well, with that, we are moving to conclusion. What is an introduction? Introduction is a preview that provides tools and motivation. Now, it's a preview of your big paper. And in this preview, you provide tools for reader to get ready, and you provide reasons for reader to keep motivating himself to read until the end. So those are the purposes. Follow the 10-part structure, maintain concise language, you satisfy both the reader and the referee. Now, reader alone cannot be taken. Even your referee is a reader. So you simply satisfy your reader. First, you have to satisfy your referee, your reviewer. Get this done by the 10-step procedure. Well, I'll be uploading the material that I use for this and everything that I use for this discussion onto Moodle, perhaps within the day or tomorrow. And what we are discussing next week will be, as you can see on screen, refining the literature review. Refining the literature review. We started with introduction, right? We looked at the basic toolkit, AI and the rest of the language engineering for first 6 sessions. And in the 7th session today, we have covered how an effective introduction could be achieved. And the week comes, we'll be discussing with literature review refining. So my dear friends, it's over to you to comment on my attempt, whether I have done something worthwhile for you, or else if I did make any waste of your time. If so, pardon me, and I should acknowledge that the material and the slides are once again prepared by Ms. Ashwini Karunaratna in assistance of me, and I acknowledge her craft, and here me, Prasanna Ratnayaka, delivering it. So what response have you got to share with me? I would love to hear your voices than just having a chat being read.